Did a Ukrainian F-16 just shoot down another Russian jet? At least that's what the rumors say right now. We'll talk about this as well as about what's happening along the front line, where Ukraine is facing the high likelihood of being forced into several retreats in the southeast. But I said all of this and more in this situation report. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen president, said that the drone attack on the Spetsnaz University in Gaugames killed no Russian or Chechen soldiers, but Ukrainian prisoners of war. He says here that there were casualties among the Ukrainian prisoners. Up to 10 prisoners are being held at each strategic facility. So either we see here that the Chechens have killed Ukrainian prisoners of war in retaliation for that attack and now claim that it was the Ukrainians themselves with that drone attack, or they're actually using Ukrainian prisoners of war as human shields in strategic installations to deter the Ukrainians from attacking them. I don't think we need to discuss whether or not this is a war crime. Then there's fresh rumors that the Ukrainians have shot down another Sukhoi 34 with their F-16s. This is Fighter Bomber, the well-connected Russian mill blogger in the air forces of the Russians. He's confirming here that they lost another Sukhoi 34, and in many pro-Ukrainian publications it's being claimed that it was likely a shoot-down with an F-16, likely now the second one that has happened. So far, though, I have not seen any proof that confirms it as of now, and until this moment, I have not even seen conclusive proof about the so-called first shoot-down with an F-16, where supposedly an F-16 took down a Sukhoi 34. It's possible, and it's more or less certain that at some point it will happen. Whether this is already the second shoot-down or whether any shoot-down has happened so far is unfortunately not known at this point. We still do not have conclusive proof. Stavropol was the Ukrainians hit in Stavropol, another oil depot. The Russians reported 80 shot down drones in this attack, but the confirmation is from the Russian side as well that in Stavropol they hit an oil depot, and supposedly in Ufa, 1,500 kilometers away from the front line, the Ukrainians hit a refinery. Here I have not seen any proof of that successful attack yet, though. Let's switch to the front line here in Kursk. We see the Russians having advanced somewhat at Pokrovsk. This is at this position here. The Russians were attacking like this here, and I have the geolocation of this. At this point, the attack seems to fail, though. The Russian 3 BTRs are withdrawing afterwards, and the infantry is running after them. It does not seem to show that this was captured at any point. Likely there's Ukrainian presence here in that forested area that has probably repulsed the Russians at this point. So maybe at best we should probably put this here in the gray zone, but I do not see additional captured territory by the Russians as of yet, at least not in this direction here. The Ukrainians have advanced, on the other hand, at Ruskoye Perechnoye. Now, the deep state map shows that the area south of it was under Ukrainian control, and now we have visual confirmation of the Ukrainians being in these houses here because they have been shelled with Russian artillery, showing that probably the front line is at the very least like this here now. The Ukrainians now have a permanent foothold in Ruskoye Perechnoye. According to the US intelligence, the North Koreans now have 8,000 soldiers in the province of Kursk. But while there are some rumors, there have even been videos being spread around of a supposed North Korean soldier being heavily wounded and complaining about the losses they suffered and all of this. So far, I have not seen conclusive proof that there was actually a combat engagement as of yet. As said, there is a lot of things being spread around. Yesterday, I think there was a video supposedly showing North Korean soldiers being hit by a drone. It later became clear that it was actually from Burma. So there's a lot of fake news being spread around in this regard. Conclusive, at least, I do not have proof that the North Koreans have actively started engaging the Ukrainians. It might have been, obviously, but I do not have the proof of it. Let's switch to the... that was it for Kursk. No serious change in territory in this regard, and at least if the North Koreans are already engaged, they have not shown any decisive change. They have not induced any decisive change in Kursk. Let's switch to the Kharkiv region. Here we have a geolocation. This is Ukrainians taking prisoners at this position, showing that the Ukrainians have advanced up to these houses here. But it obviously also shows that the Russians have been there first, that this has been a Russian position. So at least until the video was taken, this area here should have more or less been under Russian control, under solid Russian control, as this position here was held by some Russian soldiers, which are now prisoners of war. The Ukrainians, it's unclear whether the Ukrainians took positions in that basement where they took the prisoners. If so, then the new front line, the new Ukrainian-controlled area would probably be more or less like this here. But while this could show some change, it's nothing serious, no real movement along the front line that can be confirmed here as of now. Further southeast, we switch over to the Eastern Front, and here is a video from the 28th it's the 20th of October. There the Ukrainians have hit Russian positions in that forested area with a tank and a BMP-2. They shelled it, and it shows us the position of it was down here at this point, roughly around these positions here. We've seen in the past positions along these roads here that the Russians had already operated down until here. According to what I see as the current map, the likely map, Sinkivka, the Ukrainians were having positions in the southern part of it. Then we had the Russians in this area. We had them in this area. We had them down here and down here. So the potential front line is more or less like this as of now. From what we've seen, the area here is definitely no longer under solid Ukrainian control, as the deep state map implies at this point. Further to the southeast, the Russians have somewhat advanced west of Kislivka. Nothing major, but they have advanced here along the railroad tracks. So the furthest Russian position is at this point here as of now. And they've also advanced a little bit at Stelmachivka. This is directly north of Andrivka. So in this region here, we have a geolocation here as well. As you can see, this is like somewhat like a cat, maybe. The forest actually has tail, head, and the four paws. So it's at the front paw of the cat here, and this would mean the Russians were at this point here having advanced somewhat towards the west here. And then the Russians have also gained additional ground at Terny. This is down here at the Sherebets reservoirs, and after the Russians had taken the town of Novosadove, they have now entered Terny, and roughly that whole area here has fallen under Russian control as of now. We have a geolocation of this as well, where the Russians are now in the northeastern houses of Terny, and basically have entered at this point. The Russians are advancing here in this direction as well. South of the Seversky Donetsk, I actually have no changes. So the Ukrainian front lines hold in Seversk and in Chasiv Yar. The next change I have is, the next thing I have is from Toretsk. Now there are claims that the Ukrainians keep advancing inside of Toretsk, and it's actually not unlikely, because there are reports that apparently the Ukrainians had prepared the positions there. High rises that were likely positions of the Russians were heavily mined, and when the Ukrainians started their counterattack, they blew up houses filled with Russian soldiers, and thus obviously were able to take back positions that were previously held by the Russians by simply burying them under the houses they were currently sheltering in. If this is true, if the Ukrainians had prepared the defense of Toretsk, it should not be a surprise that they have local successes. We talked about it in the last situation situation report that there's clearly a small counteroffensive of the Ukrainians currently going on in Toretsk that is showing successes. But again, we're talking about a block here and a block there. This is not a complete change in the situation, but they are still advancing inside of Toretsk over the past few days, even though I have not had fresh geolocations since the last situation report from Wednesday. Further south in the direction of Pokrovsk, we have a Ukrainian counterattack as well, right here at Novorodivka. The Ukrainians were attacking down this line. We have it here on the eastern side of I think it's probably a railroad track as well. Yes. On the eastern side of that railroad track, the Ukrainians had advanced until this here. We see continued activity. In the last situation report, I showed you that the Ukrainians had operated down in this direction. Again, there they were repulsed. Here, I do not know whether they managed to take the position and hold it afterwards, but we see that the Ukrainians do local counterattacks in this area and manage to at least temporarily push the Russians back. Further south, we have a change in territory as well. The Russians are now west of Voznesenka, and that's actually unpleasant and could lead to some serious consequences. We see Voznesenka here, and this is the tree lines, and this means that the Russians are now probably at this point. So very likely the front line has moved like this here over the past few days. West of it, east of it, the front line is being pulled back by the Ukrainians. That's what we could see on the map coming over the past 2 weeks or more. The Ukrainians are currently pulling back. According to different analysis, the current front line is probably roughly like this, but with the Russians being right here already, that's probably not all that is going to happen. Just to confirm, we have visual evidence of this as well, obviously. We have northwest of Kurakhove, we have west of Kurakhove, and we have southwest. Now that's not it yet, but we have positions basically at various points in this where the Russians are solidly under control yet. And I just seen a fresh map update from pro-Ukrainian side giving most of this to the Russians, and it's likely if we see the positions here, this is less than 5 kilometers. So this is at part, at least, at times less than 5 kilometers. This is a pocket where the Ukrainians are in. And if they have no chance of holding the flanks or even pushing the Russians back, then withdrawing from there over time makes just perfect sense. We should not expect anything else in this direction. Further southeast, the Russians have had advanced close to Pobieda, but here we have the Ukrainians suddenly appearing. This is directly southwest of Pobieda. The Russians shelled a position here in these trees, and that should be roughly at this point here. So the Ukrainians are apparently still operating at the easternmost part of this area here as well, have not withdrawn, at least as of now. Further south, we have the front line almost coming close to Kurakhove from the south already. Here, the Russians have reached the town of Maximivka. They have entered it. So far, there's fighting for it still going on. And west of it, Yasna Polina has fallen. It's now under Russian control as well. And obviously, the Russians have taken everything in between. That's a width of 4.9 kilometer and in a depth of 1.7 kilometers. Positions, for instance, in those tree lines were given up by the Ukrainians and are now fully under Russian control. That was it. I do not see any change west of this area, but we can look at the map and can see what is currently going on with the Russians now already pushing in this direction. It's obvious that they want to cut this here off. We see the Ukrainians withdrawing currently at this line. I thought the minimum would be this, but with them being under pressure here, now this can obviously lead to additional losses for the Ukrainians. They might have to pull back to a line roughly like this here if they are being pushed consistently here from the north, and this would already endanger Kurakhove almost from the back if the Ukrainian positions here fall, then the Ukrainians in Kurakhove are cut off. And at the same time, the Russians are advancing from the south. They are now at Trudove. Trudove, if the Ukrainians lose it, it might not be the end of the world yet. But if they lose Uspenivka, then those small towns here in the south will be hard to hold for the Ukrainians. So we should expect the Ukrainians to withdraw from this direction in that, while Kurakhove is then threatened from the south as well. So within a certain time frame, we can expect a serious pulling back of the Ukrainians. I would not be surprised if until the end of the year the front line is more or less like this here. As you can see, it's any advance the Russians are currently having is threatening Ukrainian positions and forcing them to withdraw. And as you can see, this has now turned to almost a new big pocket where the Russians are advancing in the north and in the south to cut it off and thus again achieve a turning maneuver. I talked about it in the last situation. This is not great. Let's not sugarcoat it, but it's also not the catastrophe that some make it out. In my German channel, I said basically from the beginning, this war will not end with the Russian troops reaching the Polish border, because the Ukrainians have fought to the last square meter, and it will neither end by the Ukrainians standing on the Kerch Peninsula and looking over to the Russian side of the Kerch Strait, because either way the war will be over before. This war is less about territory than more about destroying the opponent's ability to continue fighting. And if the Russians fail doing this, as the Ukrainians manage to withdraw, then the fighting will go on. Sure, the Russians gain territory right now, but that's the difference between a tactical victory and a strategic victory. We all know that the Ukrainians gained territory in their counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. In total, I think it should have been roughly 300 square kilometers, something around that ballpark. And nobody, or very few here, would probably call that offensive a Ukrainian victory, despite them having more territory and at the end of the counteroffensive. There it was obvious for us, because our expectations was the Ukrainians might at the very least reach the town of Tokmak. Some of us might have hoped they reached the Sea of Azov, and you surely had propagandists claiming that this would be how this counteroffensive would end. But while these targets were not met, they still gained territory. But still, that didn't mean that this was suddenly a Ukrainian victory, and it's kind of the same way here. The Russians gain territory, but if they don't inflict a strategic change in this conflict, if they don't achieve a success that improves their overall situation in the war here, then it can as well be a Pyrrhic victory, as well as the Russian losses are serious at this point. Obviously, the Ukrainians have far less manpower to draw from. Then the political situation is unclear right now. The US election is about to come, and who knows who will be the new president and how much he will help Ukraine. And Europe alone is not willing to take the slack and make sure that Ukraine survives without US help regardless. So it can still turn out to be a Russian victory, but the loss of territory is not the end of the world for the Ukrainians, even though it still obviously hurts. The Ukrainians have roughly lost 500 square kilometers per month. That's like 0.8% of their country. This is not great, but this is also not the end of the world for the second biggest country. The consistency, their ability to keep fighting will be more reliant upon their armed forces, whether they stay intact and whether they can be rebuilt and replenish the losses. There we recently have fresh Ukrainian government initiatives to increase the size of the armed forces, to recruit more. We'll have to see to which degree this will be successful while the Russians are struggling. So we should expect a loss of Ukrainian positions along this line here. I would not be surprised if we see some visible losses on the map until the end of the year, but this is not a collapse of the front line, and this is not the end of the Ukrainian armed forces, and at the very least not yet, even though the problems are obviously mounting over time. Troop generation, as we already said it, the US defense minister said the Russians currently have 1,200 men in losses per day, casualties. that's 36,000 a month. But at the same time, the numbers that are being said that they recruit is 25 to 30,000. That would obviously mean right now the Russians are bleeding manpower. They are losing more than they are gaining. And the numbers we are getting are indicating that. Samara is now paying 100,000 affiliate fee. I call it affiliate. It's basically meaning if because of you somebody signs, then you get 100,000 rubles. That's usually called affiliate marketing. Then Chuvashia is now paying 1 million signing bonus, up from 500,000 rubles. Orenburg, 1 million, up from 400,000. Bremkrai is now paying 1.5 million. Bashkortostan is now paying 500,000. All of those are the increased numbers of signing bonuses show that the demand that cannot be met with the supply at the same time, so they need to increase payment. All of this signs that the Russians still have manpower troubles as well, as I mentioned a couple of times in the past. In regards to manpower, Kadyrov is announcing he's going to send 84,000 men into Ukraine, but so far the majority of the Kadyrov's fighters are not fighting along the front line. The majority of them are in the Rosgvardia and are more behind the front lines, trying to supposedly stop others from deserting and from fleeing, but not fighting themselves, even though some units from the Kadyrovtsi are also fighting along the front line. And there are reports that the Russians have now developed thermobaric warheads for the Shahid drones, another sign of developments by the Russians in this regard. In the political sphere, we have the US now sanctioning almost 400 companies and individuals because of the war in Ukraine, and they are from China, Hong Kong, India, Russia, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Thailand, Switzerland, and Malaysia. And in international support, we have the United Kingdom saying that they will now plan for £3 billion. That's almost 4 billion US dollars a year in military aid for Ukraine. Norway is sending 500 million euros, including in that are spare parts for F-16 as well as NASAMS. The US are sending 211 new Striker vehicles, ammunition for NASAMS, Stinger, air-to-ground munitions, HIMARS munition 105 and 155 shells, TOW, that's anti-tank, anti-drone equipment and ammunition, Javelin and 84, also anti-tank weapons. And we have a video of the first Panzerbandwagen 302 that the Ukrainians received. That's an obsolete APC, but you could probably call it an IFV, as it actually has a solid armament with a 20mm cannon in it. It's obsolete. It's probably like a equivalent to the M113, but the M113 does a solid job in Ukraine as well. And you can see here that's a 20mm cannon. It's, as far as I know, it's non-stabilized, and it's supposedly actually coming from a fighter plane. So it was taken off when they were taken out of service, and they just mounted them on those APCs, and thus, as they have fairly potent firepower, I guess they can be called an IFV after all. So still, even though they might be old, they are an improvement and help for Ukraine after all. And we have bad news. In past situation reports, I relied on the Ukrainians saying that the Lynx is being produced in Ukraine and that the first ones have been started. German aid to Ukraine, a good Twitter channel reporting and documenting the German aid for Ukraine, has found the original of the interview that was said, where the CEO of Rheinmetall, Pappberger, said that they would like to produce Lynx, but they can't do it yet. So the Lynx is not yet produced in Ukraine after all, unfortunately. But that was it from me for today. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. And what do you think? How will the war continue? Will the West decide to use its economic power after all to help Ukraine save its country? Or how do you think it's going to go in the future? If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so don't miss future videos. But that's it from me for now. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. And that, for instance, has done Mark Jones, who sent me The Art of War von Antoine-Henri Jomini. Thank you very much for that. I wanted to read that for ages, and it's a book that supposedly you have to have read, at least after von Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, if we talk about one of the basic works. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to read it. As said, if you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you to everyone already supporting this channel. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.